Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll wait a couple of more minutes for everyone to join us, and then we'll begin. Okay, I think we're ready to start. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Shimon, and I am the Director of Marketing here at Anecdotes. I'm very excited to be joined by Jake Bernandez, VP of Security and Compliance and at Whistic, and Kerwyn Velasco, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Anecdotes. Thank you both for being here today. Right before I invite you to introduce yourselves and we kick off our discussion, I want to remind our audience that at the end of the conversation, there will be time for some Q&A. So please feel free to send us your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. Okay, great. With that out of the way, Jake, can I ask you to share with our audience a bit about your background?
Yeah, my name's Jake Bernandez. I'm currently the VP of Security, Compliance and IT at Whistic. I'm based out of the UK, as you might hear from my accent, and I'm Whistic's first international employee. As a background, I've been in pretty much every part of security. I started as a security engineer and a pen tester, progressed into kind of true ethical hacking, a lot of social engineering, physical pen testing, then spent a number of years in breach remediation, incident response. Took me all over the world. I've worked in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, all over Europe, North America, South America, and then found a niche eventually as kind of a VC for Silicon Valley startups, out of which I then grew a career as an actual CISO and VP rather than being a virtual one. And that's where I am today.
Great. Thank you so much. Kerwyn, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is, as Shimon mentioned, Kerwyn Velasco, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Anecdotes. I've lived most of my life in software and specifically GRC software. So over the past 10 years, I wore all different types of hats, most recently as a marketing person, but I've done product management from sales to implementation. And the reason for this is that prior to this, very similar to a lot of you, I was a practitioner. So for a couple of years, like over 5 years, I was a practitioner in public accounting in the Northeast for various accounting firms and led a compliance initiative at several clients.
Okay, so we definitely have the right people with us today. Let's dive in. Our title is Building Trust Through Vendor Risk Management and Compliance Automation. Now, to build trust, there are many steps, but we can probably break them into two main groups. The first is doing the work and becoming worthy of being trusted. And the second is demonstrating that worthiness or showing others that you can be trusted. And we're going to touch on both of these today and the role security compliance and vendor risk management play in them. But before we do that, let's just take a minute to make sure that we're all on the same page here. Jake, can you please describe to us what vendor risk management entails?
In its simplest terms, it's one of those great security terms that's self-explanatory. It's about assessing and mitigating the risk in your supply chain, right? Managing vendor risk. In more complex terms, it's an acknowledgement that modern supply chains are deeply complex, that data transgresses multiple international and technical boundaries and is constantly moving in ways that we don't necessarily always understand. And it's also an acceptance of the fact that right now, most security risks and breaches are coming out of our supply chains, especially if we start to build in the concept of software supply chains and talk about kind of third-party code repositories and open source technologies. At that point, you're looking at really almost all of the most recent breaches lying in supply chains. So it's about how do we deal with that problem.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kerwyn, can you please share what we mean when we talk about security compliance?
Sure, it's typically a process in which an organization understands the various regulatory requirements, whether in the federal, state, industry, or practice-focused level, on how to protect their organization. If you asked me to go a little deeper, and I think a lot of our listeners and viewers here would want to, it could really focus in on IT-specific general controls and enterprise-level controls, depending on who you talk to and the type of organization there are and what type of security compliance they're dealing with. With security compliance, you have a level of assurance that an organization is able to protect your data and trust that those controls that are being met are addressing regulatory requirements. And again, focus on the security realm. So there's a various amount of frameworks out there that focus on the security aspect, like HIPAA, like ISO 27001 or SOC 2.
Okay, great, thank you. So thank you for that background, and I think we can definitely agree that both of these are very much have a lot to do with trust. And if we go back to the distinction that we made before between being worthy of being trusted and demonstrating it, Kerwyn, can you tell us where you see each of these land, vendor risk management and security compliance?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of reciprocal realities between vendor risk management and security compliance. And the thing is, they don't just exist for the sake of existing. They exist because really a purpose comes involved, right? For a lot of organizations, they want to start selling in a new market, or another organization might be that they want to be better, have, again, trust with their customers. And so with that business purpose, they want to be able to make sure that the components of that relationship, of the controls in place and the vendors that support those controls are sound, and that this enables them to enter those new markets, like the American market with SOC 2 aspects, or even breaking into the UK market or EMEA market with GDPR and CCPA kind of requirements. So there's definitely a lot of trust building intertwined between both of these segments here.
Jake, how do you see this? Do you see VRM more about building the trust, being worthy of it, or demonstrating it? And how do you see the security compliance?
I think they both play into both parts, and Kerwyn touched on some really relevant acronyms there when you talk about GDPR and CPRA coming, or CCPA current, and how privacy has changed. This privacy requires you to assess any vendor where data or personal data specifically flows. And therefore, if you look at any kind of data protection or security addendum in a contract you want to sign with a vendor or potential customer, it's going to say, do you do vendor assessments? Like, do you do this work? So I think you have to do that to become worthy of trust. But I think it's also about like forward facing. Like, you demonstrate trustworthiness by not just having kind of your ducks in a row, so to speak, but being able to show why they're there. Like, that position that either says, this is my GRC report. This is how I can show that we meet SOC 2 compliance. Or for us, this is our security profile. This is how we can show that we as a company have done our homework. Like, we know what we're talking about. So you kind of have those phases of you have to assess and know your supply chain to become trustworthy, but you take everything you gain there and the rest of your kind of holistic security posture and put it out to the world to say, well, actually, I'm trustworthy already. Like, you don't really need to assess me. You can look into it from the outside like a window.
Yeah, really interesting. I think the looking from the outside in, it may seem a little more simple, but when you're actually inside and you have to do the work, sometimes it's easier said than done. So Jake, what challenges do you see with how vendor risk management is done today, or done traditionally, I should say?
I think there's multiple challenges in this space. I think there are cultural, technical, and also kind of compliance challenges. Culturally, this has always been all over the place. If you look in companies, VRM might sit, or vendor risk management might sit in legal, it might sit in compliance, it might sit in procurement, it might sit in security. So actually getting into one space where someone who has a knowledge and experience in that set manages and deals with that process is challenge one. Like, putting it in a consistent and simple way. I think from a technical perspective, you've got the problem that first you've got to get the vendors in a room, so to speak. You've got to get the likes of AWS, Google, Atlassian, Salesforce to proactively give you either answers to questions or share their data for you to be able to make assessments on them. This concept that we talk about a lot about zero-touch assessments, the fact that you should be able to make a decision about whether you want to work with a vendor based on what they provide you with without having to chase and hunt it constantly. And then I think from a governance and compliance stand as well, historically, there's not been, I suppose, the appetite to automate this. Whistic was very early in its kind of profile and this kind of concept of a public-facing trust center. Before then, we just sent out questionnaires. And I was there as a practitioner. I've written 300 to 500 questionnaires for major banks globally and delivered them. And it doesn't work. It's not sustainable. It was only sustainable from a revenue perspective for the consulting firms. Otherwise, it makes no sense to anybody. So I think that, to summarize my thoughts, the major challenges are getting the right people to own this function so you can speak on a common tongue and a sensible level, getting the technologies in place to actually automate and allow this to be much more efficient and more effective. And then also being able to get down to the core of what is the best way to do this. And let's all shift as a culture and as a security leadership globally to decide how we do this in the best single way, rather than what we're doing right now, which is trying to solve it with 10 million solutions.
There's a lot to take in from that. And actually, before I jump over to Kerwyn to ask you a bit about the challenges of doing compliance traditionally, I want to stay with you for a second, Jake. In the context of vendor risk management, there are two parties involved. There's the evaluated party, or the vendor being assessed, and the evaluating party, the organization or individual conducting the assessment. Traditionally, the evaluated party has had to bear the burden of completing the lengthy and manual questionnaires and the ones that you've written and answered, I'm sure, as part of the evaluation process. While the balance of responsibility may have shifted slightly, where does it lay right now, and where do you think it's headed?
Gosh, that's a complex and multi-layered question. I think, again, Kerwyn kind of hit the nail very quickly on the head with GDPR and CCPA. And that very much states that the kind of impetus and the requirement is on the evaluating party right now, legally and contractually speaking, to make sure that we assess and therefore can give an attestation to the security part of the vendors that we allow your or my or whoever else's data it might be to flow through and with. So I think that's shifting legally. I think that's only going to keep going that direction. Whether we'll see federated privacy law in the US, who knows? But we are starting to see it tie up across continents in the rest of the world. And there's going to become a stronger and stronger incentive to do that work yourself. I think on the other side, like the evaluated, that historically the weighting requirement was just to answer questionnaires. I think now it's to become much more proactive. It's become as much a sales tool as it has become a compliance tool, which very much says to the world out there, this is my posture. I'm competent. You can see whatever you want, right? This is where I am. And beyond that, also on the sales note, it speeds things up, right? If you're trying, or if I'm trying to sell my product to you and you have to send me a questionnaire and it takes, goodness knows, 8 weeks for some outsourced team somewhere to respond to it, versus me saying, here's the URL, there's all my data. If you have a few questions afterwards, let me know. Like, how much quicker is that sales cycle? How much happier are the salespeople, not just the compliance people? So I think, I don't know if I agree that it's necessarily shifting to one or the other, but I would say the reasoning and impetus on both to act, the evaluated and the evaluated, is only becoming stronger. Okay,
great. Really, really interesting. Kerwyn, I want to jump to you for a second. The original question of this subsection was about the challenges of doing things traditionally. So can you tell us a bit about the challenges when it comes to doing compliance in the way it's done traditionally or it's done today?
Yeah, it sounds like Jake has plenty of experience doing these challenges, like from a traditional sense, and he probably has a lot of the same background as me, right? We throw people, right? We throw tons of people to manage the compliance process traditionally in a lot of organizations that have done this. So, breaking out the Excel spreadsheets, breaking out the Outlook, sending out notifications, trying to pick up all the evidence to support the controls that are in place for organizations actually are effectively working. All right. And the thing is, this, especially now, the landscape of security compliance is very much fraught. Especially because of the people that are involved, right? Because we threw so many people, we had so many changes, even today's budgets, we see that there's a people problem, that we have people that don't have the right amount of skills. We have people that are absent because they went to other organizations and we can't retain people. All right. There's a lot of great surveys that were done by our organization and relative other orders like Gartner, ISACA, IC Squared that says that there is a people gap when it comes to meeting compliance challenges. All right. And the thing is, a lot of it is gatekeeping of people, that people are the reasons why we're trying to get information and they're not there, or there's a lack of a control owner or as a person submitting evidence, or there's a lack of skills on people evaluating that evidence is relative and applicable as the requirements from IAA for internal audit to apply to the security compliance process. So that's a big challenge I see when it comes to compliance historically. And that has to change, especially this year with all the upcoming changes in regulations and streamlining of regulations across the board.
Okay, great. So before we jump over to solutions, I want to shift for a second to talk a little bit about, we've kind of spoken separately about vendor risk management and about compliance. And I want to hear from both of you how you kind of see the two of these interact and where exactly you see them meeting. Kerwyn, do you want to kick us off? Can you tell us a bit where you see these two worlds come together?
Yeah, there are three primary ways that I see these two teams interacting. All right. And I think it gives a lot of value. First, when it comes to communication, updates of the findings associated to vendors or findings associated to controls as it relates and impacts vendors to external and internal parties. All right. Obviously, a vendor risk management team can obviously work well with the security compliance team to coordinate those efforts to make sure that the level of communication that goes out is appropriate to the people receiving it. All right. And being able to fully communicate, especially to external people, the people like consultants, to board, to shareholders, to people who are not in and out understanding the context of the controls, be able to simplify that. That's very important. And I think that's a great way that both the VRM and security compliance team can work together. The second part is handling remediation, all right? And being able to operationalize, like say a playbook, because oftentimes there's a relationship of that there is a boundary that a compliance team would take something in the event that a breach occurs and be able to work from there with the VRM team, let's say as like an incident response that goes out, or communication, or in this case might be like a fixing, a patching of something, all right? And the event that that boundary is owned by a vendor, that's very important. The third way that I see that these teams work well together and that would be able to have synergy is the ability to prioritize business units. Basically, to me, working in GRC for the past 10 years, the way to understand relationships between governance, risk, and compliance is very important. And the synergy between VRM teams, vendor risk management teams, and security compliance comprise of that, understanding context, being able to understand what comprises what's important to my organization. And we see that in multiple levels. We also see it that like the federal government, the United States, with Executive Order 14028 to basically understand what are the components of our supply chain, very much needed in order for us to work well together and protect the things that are important to us, not only individually, but as an industry.
Okay. Really, really interesting. Jake, what's your take on this? How do these two worlds connect? And I guess Kerwyn also touched about the synergies that you see between these two worlds.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think Kerwyn and I kind of come from slightly different backgrounds and slightly similar backgrounds at the same time. He sees a lot of things around people. I think that's interesting around how functions of business units work. And at heart, I'm an engineer and a techie, so I look at solutions and software. And so I think about how these two worlds overall like kind of touch each other right now. And for me, if you've got a GRC tool or a platform like an Anecdotes, then that's effectively your resume builder, right? If you'd like to say it that way, it builds your LinkedIn profile for you. And Whistic is the platform in the world in which you share it. We allow people the chance to put that out so that other people can look and decide, do I want to hire that person? They can ask questions. They can attest to the reality of the things they say with recommendations or kind of referrals. We allow you to take that posture that you build in the GRC world and make it real and living, like make it have a function and a purpose. Okay.
Really interesting. I think if let's take one step back before we dive a little deeper into how the Anecdotes and Whistic can work together. But let's talk a second about the role automation can play in both vendor risk management and compliance. Jake, do you want to start us off? How do you see automation kind of the shift that it's making in this industry?
Yeah, look, if big data and AI were the buzzwords of the 2010s, then automation is the buzzword of the 2020s, right? We talk about it all the time, almost obsessively. So I think it's important to strip it back and talk about what are we actually trying to achieve rather than just saying what does automation mean. I think there's always two things you're trying to do here. One is cut costs, increase efficiencies. So how can you make things work faster and do it cheaper? Whether that means with less headcount or less technology, whatever it might mean, let's try and improve things there. And the second is, how can you make things better, smarter, faster? Like, how can you actually improve the way things are done? So I think this is where you talk about disruption a lot in technology. And I think if you look at kind of how automation is playing a part in both of these worlds, in vendor risk, it taking that Excel questionnaire that we used to send through Google and just throwing out the window and saying it never worked. Let's not try and improve on things that didn't work. Let's just throw it away and try again. And if the next thing doesn't work, let's throw that away and try again, right? It's always being able to iterate and say, how can we make this better? So for us, it's get rid of the Excel spreadsheet, have a platform that allows you to do those questionnaire topics if you want to. Then let's go beyond that and saying, let's have just pure profiles. Let's have everyone just exchange their information proactively and openly and transparently without the need to ask questions. Then let's go beyond that and we look at our trust catalog and let's have a marketplace where that's all just available. You don't even have to ask for the profile that belongs to Anecdotes. You just go and find it. So that's for us. And if you look at kind of automation on your side, look, I've been there leading teams that have had to build SOC compliance at startups. Goodness, I think I've run for first-time SOC compliance probably 30 or 40 times. And it's horrible. Like there's someone sitting with a spreadsheet somewhere trying to work out, this control says this, here's the evidence, here's the link. Then that person leaves, as Kerwyn points out, it's quite hard to retain talent at times. And the next person doesn't understand what they just wrote. And it's never worked. So the concept of automating that to pull from existing technology in our stack, from existing answers, from existing people's minds before they leave, and to put that into a place to automate that process, we've been asking for that for well over a decade. And I think the steps we've made in recent years are really important in kind of turning compliance on its head.
Really interesting. I think you make a very interesting point about not necessarily automating processes that already exist, but understanding processes that don't work, creating the new ones that are automated. Kerwyn, do you agree here with Jake? How do you see this automation, this year's buzzword of automation as it comes to vendor risk management and compliance?
I totally agree with a lot of the points that Jake made, but I think it goes back to the fact that a lot of, let's say, providers in this space, the ones that are being evaluated by Gartner and Forrester, they claim automation a lot. They claim that it exists for them, but in my perspective, going back to, are you trustworthy? Are you able to provide that trust to the marketplace? This goes back to, is it defensible, essentially, right? Is the evidence that you provide defensible? And looking back at a lot of providers and other tools out there, they don't provide the right amount of evidence. They don't provide evidence from the source, essentially, all right? Tools that don't do this are at a huge disadvantage because then it either relies on, let's say, a third-party aggregation tool or on especially people's taking their word for it. And a lot of people have been burned by that, right? So I'll give you an example, right? Travelers Insurance, a large insurance company, did a underwrite for a company called ICS. And ICS, as part of their evaluation, they said they had multi-factor authentication implemented in their organization. In fact, they were breached, and the breach was because they didn't have MFA enabled or implemented. And so Travelers was able to get out of paying that because of this. Now, if there was evidence that was backing most of these claims, all right, and the thing is, going back, what was straight away from more of the self-attestation, I pledge, I did my right due diligence, and actually having data to back up most of these. This is where the beauty of the integration between vendor risk management and secure compliance can really exist, where you have to have defensible artifacts that say, hey, this is actually in place, it's continuously being evaluated. And on top of that, we share this information at a level that is appropriate for the people receiving it, right? It's so important. So I would say going that way. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, just to add, I think the thing you touched on, the use of pretty commonly known accepted APIs to transfer things from being point in time to real time is what's really changed it. If we look at multiple major data breaches in time, they are all things which really their certifications attested to the fact they had in order. Whether that's updating basic Java frameworks or whether that's completing basic security sanitization checks on imported open source libraries, like all these things you can actually check by basically API call without having to say to someone, did you do it? Do you swear that you did it?
Yeah. So I think there are a few challenges that the two of you just spoke about, specifically with the automation. So a lot of challenges that automation can fix, but there can also be some challenges with the automation itself. Jake, what are the current challenges or obstacles that you see in order for us to fully automate the vendor risk management process? And is there a scenario that pursuing full automation shouldn't be the end goal for vendor risk management?
I think I always think about things in the PPT format, so people, processes, and technology. And I think all of those play into this one. It's going to be hard to fully automate because of people. We have, as we do in all worlds, we have generational differences between leadership, between those who sit in certain chairs, Fortune 50s, and those who sit in the chairs of the startups, and the way they see the world and the way they want to see the world. Whether that's against kind of reliable, tested, reputable processes and vendors, or those like myself who want disruption, like they want to find the new tiny vendor that came out of nowhere and did something differently. And until we're kind of aligned and there's been a bit more of a cultural shift, it's always going to be hard for people to adopt a single fully automated way, because people simply want to go with the tried and tested questionnaire that's completed by their team of 20 people. They don't want to go further yet. And I think we need to make that cultural shift to get there. From a process perspective, this is where it becomes a little bit of a, how far can it go? There is subjectivity. Right, risk acceptance by its very nature is subjective. If you haven't guessed by now, I'm probably on the more aggressive line that I think if you can understand a risk, you can accept it in a far more comfortable way than simply saying that's a risk. And that's always going to exist in vendors. Like there's going to be an area where you say, am I okay with that? And my answer and your answer and Kerwyn's answer might be different. So it's very hard to completely automate that kind of step away. And then technologies wise, automation asks a lot. It asks us to be completely tied up in how we want to achieve things, to get the right things in the right places at the right times, and to make decisions that are difficult. If I go and step into your world, into the GRC space and say, okay, so we assess a company's security posture based on these APIs into this technology stack. What if they've got 3 different or 4 different or 5 different technologies in that stack? Or what if they're across 29 countries? Like which country carries more risk? Which tech product carries more risk? It becomes, again, very hard for how do you fully automate. There's always going to have to be a degree of a human somewhere that has the expertise, the knowledge and the experience to have that little golden input, which is the difference between simply saying yes or no and actually saying yes because or no because.
I want to touch on another issue that maybe I think connects to the beginning of your answer about people, that there are sometimes seems to be a bit of a discrepancy between the desire for transparency and the desire for security. And I think the reason I say it has to do with people is because I think we'll find people on both of these spectrums. How do you think we should navigate this discrepancy? And Jake, let's start with you.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about zero-touch assessments in Whistic, and if anyone's not familiar, the concept is that you have a security profile established and curated by a vendor, and there is sufficient information in that profile, whether it's pre-complete questionnaires, policies, audit reports, pen test results, DR documentation, whatever it might be, right? It's sufficient for you to make a decision based on what I just previously said about whether you are okay with the risk that vendor presents or not without you ever speaking to the vendor, hence the zero touch, or that's the only contact you have. Now, that requires transparency. It's inherent. If you aren't sharing sufficient things in your profile, then it's very hard for me to make a decision about whether I can kind of do business with you, right? I don't know your DR approach. I don't know if you tested your IR or your instant response. I don't know which cloud provider you use. I don't know if you are SOC 2 or ISO compliant, or maybe I have no idea why you're self-attesting the GDPR and what really underlies that self-attestation. I'm probably on the far end of this spectrum. I'm a true advocate for transparency. I think there is a very fine line right at the very end. I wouldn't share an unremediated pen test report, but I would share happily a remediated pen test report. I'd let you know all the incidents and all the problems that I had once I fixed them within that 30, 60, 90-day period, right? And I think you should be able to share everything. I get all the people all the time who are confused when they say, can you share it? Do we need an NDA for your SOC 2 report? And I say, no, it's on the web, exceptions and all that. You can read it. I think we need to shift culture that way. Security leaders have a tough job. Our world is getting bigger and bigger, and it's getting harder and harder to manage. And if you look on LinkedIn, someone has a breach somewhere, whether that's LastPass or Uber, wherever it is, and you'll see a queue of security leaders in roles like myself who will jump on the bandwagon to attack how foolish and silly it was that they got breached in that way. That doesn't get us anywhere. Like, we have to build a culture that's built on trust. We have to get into a world where we're willing to share everything, warts and all, with each other, and then learn from it. I look at our customers' profiles, whether that's Zoom or whether that's Okta or Atlassian. I'll have a look and say, that's interesting. Look how they're dealing with instant response. That's interesting. Look who they're using for GRC automation. And maybe I can learn from those things. But if we don't share proactively and sufficiently and transparently, we're never going to get there. We're always going to be stuck in that place where someone will get caught for some little thing they didn't know their analysts or managers weren't doing, and everyone will attack them for it. And that is no way forward in security.
Kerwyn, where are you on the spectrum of full transparency to I don't know what would be
I appreciate Jake, like, says, I'll share a pen test report only after it's remediated. That's exactly like my mindset too, is like, I would love to share a lot more information, but from my, like, again, very conservative auditing perspective, right now, Jake comes from like the fast engineering perspective. I come from the more like pessimistic and be aware of a lot of threat actors. And so like, I come from the world where I feel like sharing to an extent, all right, and sharing it just enough to be broad, just enough to show that here's the generics. To me, not every framework is made equal. All of them have different nuances that actually tells an attacker or tells someone who might be a threat actor, here's the specific things that are wrong with this specific organization based upon your response in this Area 53, right? Rev 5, all I know, right? And so I want to make sure that when we do share information with other organizations, especially because it's around trust. And I agree with Jake in the sentiment that we have to share more with others to learn from it. That is a foundational aspect in a lot of the organizations I'm part of, especially ISACA and the information sharing commissions all throughout the United States, like the multi-state information sharing committees, the ISACs. They want to make sure that we're able to benchmark. If something happens to one of us, we're able to defend against it from the other's perspective. All right. So understanding what's wrong with other organizations should be definitely used as a learning perspective. But again, to a point, all right. So I'll give you an example of to a point that I would. Same thing with Jake. Audit findings, right? If I have an audit finding that comes out that we don't have a proper change management process in place, I will let them know that there's a problem with that process, but I will tell them the specifics, that we don't, populate the rollback plan, or we do certain things like we implement in production by the same person that is writing the test as well as implementing in production, right? We don't want to tell about specific things that threat actors might be aware of, right? But telling that there's a problem with the change management process that should be made aware of, that is fine, all right? But again, I think as a CEO to Jake, I do understand the need to share information to benchmark, actually.
I think it's our job, and my kind of challenge is, look, if we're going to talk so much about zero touchability, and I kind of just coined that term, the concept that you can assess somebody based purely on what they share with you, then it's our job as a company to convince people like you, Kerwyn, what that threshold is. Like, what is that point where we say you have to share this amount or else people can't assess you, and then try and guide you and say, but it's okay to share this amount because, like, that's my mission and challenge, I guess, is to make sure that we are open, transparent in the market of what is enough and why enough is okay. Like, why is that not a problem? Why is that safe? Why is that secure? Why should we slowly move away from the historical perspective of, I can't let anyone see anything in case there's something in there that I don't know about, right? Everyone fears the unknown unknowns.
Yeah. A little bit of Chicken Little type thing.
It'd be really interesting to see where our audience, where they are on the spectrum and what they feel more comfortable and less comfortable with. You're welcome to share with us. Right before we get to the questions, I just want to also have a chance to talk quickly about the integration and the work that Whistic and Anecdotes are doing together. You both kind of alluded to what exactly, Jake about Whistic and Kerwyn about Anecdotes, but just quickly want to make sure that everyone in the audience knows what both of us do. So Jake, want to tell us briefly about what Whistic does exactly?
Whistic's effectively a three-part platform. It allows you to assess the vendors or suppliers in your supply chain and make security-based decisions about whether you do or do not want to allow them in your supply chain. It allows you then on the flip side to proactively share your security posture to whatever degree of transparency you want to your potential customers, including pre-completed questionnaires, documentation, live security feeds, information about me, my orders, my tests, whatever you want to put in there, right? And then the third place, it acts as a marketplace, what we call the trust catalog, where vendors can proactively and publicly share their posture and their profile with anyone who'd want to find it, effectively creating kind of a marketplace type environment where you can shop around for different vendors and their security postures.
All right, thank you, Jake. Kerwyn?
Sure, Anecdotes is a security compliance automation operating system, essentially using data as the underlying force behind all decisions. So the ability to align on certain frameworks, understanding the effectiveness of that framework across multiple domains, being able to understand what the risk management strategies and the relationship of controls to risks, and then the ability to make choices about policies and user access reviews. These are all some of the mainstays for compliance leaders to show and highlight their work within the organization. The main focus of, again, Anecdotes is the data, and that's why we are so proud that we have all first-party integrations to over 100 tools within our catalog, and Whistic being one of them, actually, and a very powerful one, actually. We are so happy about the Whistic relationship that we actually give Whistic away to our customers because we see the value that Whistic has within the integration within Anecdotes.
Yeah, so you already spoke a little bit about the integration. Jake, you want to talk a bit about the relationship that we've built? I mean, the whole topic for this webinar was about building trust through both vendor risk management and compliance. And kind of that's what our integration and the partnership between our two companies is about. But do you want to share a bit more from your perspective?
Is that one for me, sorry?
Yeah, sorry.
Just a bit, of course.
Sorry.
Yeah, of course. So a lot of the work that's been done between our two organizations, our VP of Partnerships, Neil D'Souza, is not on this call, has spent a lot of time building a really strong relationship and brand with Anecdotes. And as Kerwyn kind of pointed towards, I think the real power here is that you've got a platform in Anecdotes that automates your compliance posture and allows you to create this effect, like I said, a resume of your business. And that then we have a firm belief between us and as a relationship that we should be able to share that, and we should want to share that. So we use Whistic's free profiles, which you're able to then give to your customers to be able to take what they have built and the work that they've done inside the Anecdotes platform and share that with the world. Use that to speed up sales cycles, to reduce time of sales cycles, to reduce costs, to get all those kind of synergies and efficiencies and the benefit of both worlds.
Amazing. Okay, so I want to move to some of the questions we got from the audience. But before I do, I just want to say that if we don't get to some of your questions, we'll do our best to answer you in some way. So just make sure that you keep sending them and feel free to reach out to us afterwards. The first question, how close are we to standardizing the VRM process? Is a lack of unification holding us back? Jake, you want to start us off here?
I think we're a long way from it. And I speak to it from a compliance world. And Kerwyn might nod and smile at this point, but like you look at ISO 27001 and SOC 2, there is so much overlap. I think we're talking like 80, 85%. What those represent is simply two different geographies. SOC 2 is inherent in North America. ISO is inherent in Europe. It's where they both came from, surprisingly. So, and you see over time, they've not amalgamated into one. They've stayed succinct and independent. And I think we've got that problem in vendor risk, right? To be able to coordinate to a single thing that says this is the only standard that matters across the entire globe would require getting so many people into one space with so many different opinions and to agree. Now, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Simply, unequivocally, that's my statement on my truth. What we can do is find ways to take what we've got and bring it to one lens. So if you look at like where Whistic's going, we talk about the Whistic control framework, the concept that regardless of what you've answered or what you've input as data, we'll present you with the same set of what we think matters most. It's like 60 or 70 questions. This is what matters most. It pulls from SOC, from ISO, from HIPAA, from FedRAMP, from GDPR, from CPRA, whatever, right? And it pulls it into one lens to give you complete comparability. Because that's the problem that we have right now. You can't compare people with different standards and different frameworks and different postures. So we're taking to a place that says, yes, the world might not align on a single standard to which we're all going to adhere, but let's take one lens to look at the multiplicity of different approaches we've currently got and make it easy for you to go vendor A, vendor B. Yes, I can compare those two.
Really interesting. Kerwyn, you want to add something here?
I think I do agree aspects of what Jake said, but I'm going to take it to the spin of the VRM side, where again, I've been involved in several VRM implementations and the need for the standard questionnaire that all the people answer, right? And so recently, like I know Whistic recently released their integration or their use of the SIG 2022, 2021, I can't remember, but along with that, there's a bunch of other, questionnaires that could be used, whether you're like your higher education with HECVAT or a cloud security organization with CAIQ. There's a bunch out there. And again, this normalization of understand this unified control views is extremely important to get a lot of return back. And the thing is, like, we both have that in common where we understand the value of the overlap, understand how much throughput do we have in answering one set of questions, how does it relate to another? And the thing is, this enables, going back to my first point, the business, right? Going back to that, if you answer this might enable you to better align to the requirements of privacy for GDPR, or better align to ESG standards that we have coming from the EU or various other standards. And the thing is, we want to leverage that because that's all part of the automation that we want to bring. The enablement of mapping across to understand all this effort you put in one can be reused to another.
Okay, great. We have another question coming back to our earlier debate about transparency. If transparency is the aim of the game, why haven't we shifted from answer-based responses to evidence-based responses? Kerwyn, you want to kick this one off?
I think a lot of organizations are at odds when it comes to resources, actually, right? I feel like with the amount of people that are owning this process of evaluating compliance and even VRM teams, for all I know, they're the same team. In some organizations, they are, right? And the problem is that we need to make it so that we get the best use of that person's time when it comes to these efforts. So do you want them to basically take time to remap the coverage, or do you want to take them to actually help mitigate problems that are identified from this process? All right, that's very important, and I think that a lot of organizations can benefit from this relationship by focusing on that type of actions.
Great. Jake, your perspective on this?
I think we are. I think tools like yourselves and your competitors as well have given us the chance to do that. Right? Historically, it was very hard to go from pure evidence-based because what I was doing was trying to find the evidence from my last SOC 2 audit and throw that out as the answer or attachment, right? Or maybe I was looking for the quarterly minutes of some random meeting. But I think tools like Anecdotes have given us an ability to now do that in a much more real-time way. Like the plug API version says, well, actually, I can see what's happening in tools and tech and application right now. And that's evidence. So I think we are. And then if you look at Whistic profile and what Kerwyn, like I mentioned, the fact that you can share your Anecdotes profile and posture through a free Whistic profile and put it out there, well, that's allowing you to take that evidence and make it the responses to questions you haven't been asked yet. I think if you tie that in with where a lot of the vendor risk platforms are going, probably ours included, around the idea of like a searchable knowledge base where you can kind of automatically pre-answer questionnaires that off of what you said before without having to say it again, then I think combined, we are going there. It's just taking time. And I think Kerwyn's pointed out and very eloquently spoke to it multiple times today, that people are often the problem. There is a skills gap. I totally agree. But there is equally a problem that too many people have built massive VRM and compliance teams that they don't want to automate away because that's a team of 20 people's job they're not going to automate away tomorrow. So we have to do both, right? We're moving that direction, but again, it's always about shifting the culture of leadership and bringing people on the journey that says this is a better way.
Really, really interesting. And I know there are a couple of questions we haven't got to, but unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. I want to thank our incredible speakers, Kerwyn and Jake, for a fascinating discussion. You've definitely given us a lot to think about, whether it be about the problems that we have today in compliance and vendor risk management, how automation can fix these two, where we think companies should be going in terms of transparency, and of course, a bit about the partnership that we built between Anecdotes and Whistic. So thank you both very much. And I'd also like to thank everyone, all of you, for joining us. And I wish you a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Thank you.